Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today, and welcome to our webinar on preparing for your NDIS plan review. It's great to have you all with us. My name's Caitlin McMorrow, and I'm Vision Australia's National Operations Lead for NDIS, and I'm based at our Coorparoo office in Brisbane. Today's session will go for around an hour, and you are able to ask questions live during this session if you'd like to. You can type your questions into the chat section of the Zoom window that you're watching this webinar in. We'll aim to get through as many of your questions as we can during the session. And just a reminder, when asking questions, try to keep them general if you can, and don't disclose highly personal information about yourself or your NDIS plan, as your questions may be visible to others during the session. I also wanted to let you know that at the end of the webinar, there'll be a brief survey that will pop up on your screen. Please complete that if you can. It helps us to understand whether you find these sessions useful, and we very much value and appreciate your feedback. So in previous webinars, which some of you may have attended, we've talked about things like preparing for your first NDIS plan and getting the most out of your NDIS supports. If you missed these webinars and you'd like to view them again, they are available on our YouTube channel. So you can go to that and watch those again if you'd like to. In today's session, we're talking about preparing for your NDIS plan review. So we'll be covering what an NDIS plan review is and why it's important. We'll be talking a bit about how to prepare for your NDIS plan review, some key information that you might need and that you might want to think about beforehand. We'll be talking about how Vision Australia can help you to prepare for your plan review, and also what you can do if you're not happy with the outcome of your plan. So let's talk a little bit first about what an NDIS plan review is. So your first NDIS plan review generally takes place around about 12 months after your plan starts. So towards the end of your first year on the scheme, the NDIA will contact you to set up a plan review meeting to discuss your current plan and the supports you might need in the future. The NDIS, as many of you would know, is designed to build your skills and independence so that you can live a better life. And that means that as you work towards different goals at different times, the amount of support and the types of support you might need may change. So plan reviews are quite important because they make sure that your NDIS plan is working for you. So your plan review gives you the opportunity to do a couple of things. First of all, it's a chance to check whether your current supports are working well. It's also a chance to think about how you've gone in meeting your plan goals for the last year, and also an opportunity to consider any new goals that you might want to think about in the coming year and the supports you might need to achieve those. Depending on your preference, plan reviews can be conducted face-to-face or over the phone. You're also welcome to take a support person to your plan review meeting with you if you wish, and that can be a family member, a friend, or an advocate. Or it can be your support coordinator if you're funded for one of those in your plan. Excuse me. If you're aged between 7 and 65, your plan review will be conducted generally by your local area coordinator or NDIA planner. If you're aged under 7 and you've entered the NDIS through the early childhood intervention pathway, then your plan review will be conducted by your early childhood intervention partner. So that's a brief overview, I guess, of what the plan review is and why it's important. So we might go on now to talk a little bit about how to prepare for it. And just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question live during the session, you can type that into the chat section of your Zoom window that you're watching this webinar in. Screen reader users, you may need to tab around the window to find that chat button, and that'll open up the relevant section for you. So preparing for your plan review. Your plan review meeting is crucial to the development of your next plan. So the more prepared you are, the more likely it is that you'll get outcomes that you're happy with. When you're coming to the end of your plan, it's a good idea to touch base with your key service providers. And those of you who attended our last webinar might remember that we talked about Ready Set, which is a unique planning tool that's been developed by Vision Australia. So we can use this planning tool to help you get ready for your first plan, but we can also use it to help you prepare for your plan review as well. So when you work with us using our unique planning tool, you get a chat with a Vision Australia expert before your plan review meeting, and a chance for us to answer any questions you might have about funding for your next plan. You also get support with goal setting, and this can be really important for a plan review. Hopefully you've progressed to achieving your plan goals throughout the year, but if there are things, for example, that have stopped you from doing that, it's really important that we talk about them before your review. We can help you to look at different ways of making sure your supports work better for you the next time around. And you might also have additional goals that you want to work towards in your new plan. So we can work with you to develop ideas about the types of supports you might want to help you achieve those. You also get information about the full range of services that are available from Vision Australia. That can be really useful because as your needs change, sometimes there's additional things that you might not have thought of, or services we have that could help you in ways you haven't considered yet. We can also help you to identify other supports that are commonly used by people who are blind or have low vision. So that's the one advantage, I guess, of the expertise we have in working with lots of different clients. In addition to the services we offer, we also know a lot about other types of supports that people who are blind or have low vision might commonly access with their plan funding. So we can help you to identify some of those as well. If you're working with us to prepare for your plan review, you also get a service estimate, and that's a document in the format of your choice that you can take to your plan review meeting. So it contains information about all of the services and supports you might need and enables your planner to understand how those might help you to achieve your goals. Most importantly, your service estimate is built by you, so it's designed to make sure that you get the best possible funding outcome. We might break now and answer a few questions. So Naomi, I'm going to hand over to you to share some of the questions that have come in.
Thanks, Caitlin. The first question we've got is from Michael, who wants to know if installation of a ramp could be covered by an NDIS plan.
Yes, so the NDIS will often cover home modifications, which is the type of funding that installation of a ramp would sit under. They will cover those if they're related to your disability. So if, for example, you needed the ramp because of a medical condition, that might not be funded. But if it's something that you need to have that's related to your disability, there's a good chance that would be funded under NDIS. Depending on how complex it is, you might need an assessment to look at the most appropriate option for you, but that's certainly something you could explore with a service provider like an occupational therapist. So yes, potentially NDIS would cover that.
Thanks, Caitlin. The next question is from Karen, who wants to know, how do you request more of a service at the review process? Who are the best people to write the report supporting a request if there is no report from the service providers?
So if you're not able to get a report from your service providers, firstly, it's probably a good idea to have a look at why that is. For example, if you didn't have enough funding left in your plan for the provider to prepare one, that might be something that you want to think about the next time around as you're using your funding. Naomi, there was a second part to that. Sorry, the first part of the question, can you just read it for me again?
Sure. How do you request more of a service at the review process? Yep. That's the first part. And the second part is, who are the best people to write the report supporting a request if there is no report from the service providers?
So if your provider's not able to provide a report, it might be worth talking with them about whether there's other options. For example, they might still be able to provide a record, at least, of the services that you've received from them, or a letter of support or something like that. You can also take your own information to the plan review meeting, and it's a really good idea to keep your own records about services that you've received, and how often you've received that service, how it's helped you to achieve your goals, things like that, because that can really help when you come to have that discussion about, look, I've really benefited from this support, but I've got some ongoing goals that mean I'll still need it in my next plan, and those kinds of things. So really good to keep your own records, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. The next question is from Steve, who wants to know, what are the most common home supports that people with vision impairment ask for?
So I guess a lot of people might find that they have some challenges with things like cleaning, garden maintenance, particularly if they've got a big yard that needs mowing and that kind of thing. So sometimes, or often, the NDIS can support with things like that. So those probably would be the most home supports. You might also get some assistance in terms of community access from support workers if you need a hand with shopping or tasks in the home, some of those kinds of things. So they can be funded as well, in addition to all your capacity building services. So things like therapy that help you to develop your skills.
Thanks, Caitlin. We've got another question that's come in from Francis. Does Vision Australia bill the NDIS for our plan to help review my current plan?
So if you need things like progress reports and things like that, then generally your service provider from Vision Australia would talk with you about that at the beginning of your plan when you set up your service agreement with us, to make sure that there's enough funding for some of those activities when your plan review comes around. So depending on what it is that you need, yes, some of that might be billable, but it shouldn't be a surprise to you. We'll have had discussions with you when you initially come to us to receive services about things that you might need when your plan review comes around.
Thank you. We now have a question from Giselle,
Yep.
who would like to know, what could I do at my next planning meeting to ensure funds are allocated at the correct rate under the correct budget?
So if you're working with Vision Australia around your pre-plan, your plan review, that's something that we can provide as part of the service estimate document that you get from us about the types of supports you might need going forward. So that will fairly clearly identify the plan budgets that those services would normally come out of and what the rates are for them and that kind of thing. If you're working with other service providers, it would be worth talking with them about whether they can include that in any progress reports or letters of support and things like that they might be doing for you. It's always really good to have clear information about that. We know that sometimes there's still some misunderstanding with planners around things like what support budgets vision specific services come out of. So for example, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion around the fact that the support you get from a therapist or an O&M specialist isn't necessarily the same as the support you might access from a support worker. So yeah, trying to make sure you have that information clearly set out beforehand. That's certainly something we do if you're working with us. But if you're working with another provider, then I'd be encouraging them to provide really clear information about that as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. We've got a question from Elga, who wants to know, when the funds from the first NDIS plan were partially used, how can we make sure the funds will not be cut in the second plan?
So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the session today. But if you haven't used all of your plan funding, it's a good idea to have a think about that beforehand and identify any reasons that might have prevented you from using it. So, for example, was it that services weren't available in your area for you to access? Have you maybe had some medical issues throughout the year that have sort of prevented you from getting services as often as you would have liked them and things like that? So it can really help to identify anything that's prevented you from using all of your current funding, so that you can have a good, honest discussion about that at your planning review meeting, so that the NDIA knows that you haven't used it, not because you don't need it, but because there's other things that have perhaps gotten in the way.
Great. We have another question from Denise.
Yep.
If one of the services I use is organised by me, for example, a cleaner, do I need a report from them or do I write one myself?
No, generally for that kind of service, you wouldn't need to. That would come out of your core supports funding, and that's generally a home support where it's already been sort of thought about the amount of funding that you need for that at the beginning of the year. So no, I don't think they would generally expect a progress report for those kinds of things. It's more where you're getting services that help you to develop your skills and things like that, where we'd be looking at those types of progress reports. I
Excellent.
might take one more, Naomi, and then we'll carry on.
Sure. I've got a question here from Liz, who is asking, can anti-glare blinds be purchased in a consumable budget? Can sensor lights be covered in consumable budget? They are for a driveway to improve visibility and safety at night.
So that's a slightly tricky one. I guess the key thing to remember when you're thinking about the consumables budget is that anything you purchase still needs to be really directly related to your disability and also potentially to the goals that you've got in your NDIS plan. Whether items like sensor lights and things like that could be purchased under consumables will depend on a couple of things. One will be the cost of the product, so it would need to be under $1,500 to be eligible for purchase under consumables. The other thing to think about is whether it's kind of an off-the-shelf product that you can just bring home and start to use, or whether it's something that might require installation. So for example, if your sensor lights required installation from an electrician or something like that, you might need to look at a home modifications assessment for those, because that would be a bit of a higher risk product that you can't just set up and use yourself. So there's a couple of things that would come into play there, depending on the complexity of the product and what it costs and whether it needs someone else to install it or not, will sort of make the difference as to whether it's purchasable under your consumables funding or not. If you're not sure, probably good to have a chat with someone like an occupational therapist who'll be able to give you some guidance on that.
Great. Caitlin, did you want to take some more questions or progress with the...
We might carry on, I think, and we'll come back to some more questions at the end. So just a reminder, if you've just joined us, welcome along to the webinar. You can ask questions live during the session if you'd like to. And you can do that by typing them into the chat section of the Zoom window that you're watching this webinar in. If you're a screen reader, you might need to tab around the window a little bit and find the chat button, which will open up the relevant section for you. So we talked a little bit about preparing for plan review and the ways in which Vision Australia can help you with that, particularly with our unique planning tool, which can help to make sure that you get a positive funding outcome. There's a few other tips though that we could think about to help you in preparing for your plan review as well. And some of these we've already touched on a little bit during the questions. The first one is being organised. So try to be organised throughout your plan. Even if you've still got 6 months or more to go before your review, it's a really good idea to start keeping track of how you're progressing towards your goals and how much of your funding you've used. If you have to cancel appointments for services and things like that, try to do what you can to reschedule them so that you can demonstrate that you've used all of your funding when your plan review comes around. Any unspent funding that you have left in your plan doesn't roll over to the next year. So it's important to think about that, not just at the end of your plan when you're looking at what you've used, but on the way through as well, so that you can plan your services sort of over the length of your plan. It's also a really good idea to make sure you know the end date of your plan so that you can start preparing for your review in plenty of time. It's also important to allow time and funding for your service providers to complete progress reports for you if you need those, particularly if you've had services under things like your capacity building budget or you've those kinds of things. So If you aren't sure what you might need in that regard, it's a good idea to talk with your local area coordinator or your support coordinator if you're funded for one, about any progress reports related to your services that you might need for your plan review. Those progress reports can be really important because they help to demonstrate the outcomes you've achieved as a result of the supports that you've purchased with your NDIS funding. Your service providers will need some time, though, before your plan review to prepare them. So try to give as much notice as you can. And you'll also potentially need to leave some funding in your plan to cover those reports as well. So it's a really good idea to think about them early, so that you know what you need to have and you can prepare for it well ahead of schedule. The other thing that you'll want to think about before your plan review is the current supports that you access. So it's a good idea to spend a bit of time thinking about these in preparation for that review meeting. So think about your current plan and review your goals. It's a good idea to think about the services and supports and equipment that you've currently received and whether or not each of them has been successful for you. So if some of your supports haven't worked well for you, think about how things could be improved. And I guess on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you've been really happy with something, it's a good idea to think about what made that support such a good experience for you, because that might play into the types of supports that you're thinking might work for you in the future for your next plan. So let's talk a little bit about a client example, just so you can kind of see how this works in practice. So the client that we're looking at in our example today is Sally. And Sally joined the NDIS and received her plan 9 months ago. So she knows that she'll shortly be coming up for her first plan review, and she wants to be well prepared for it. Sally comes to Vision Australia to talk with her service providers about how she went in meeting her current goals and to explore some additional options for her next plan. So one of Sally's goals in this current plan was to improve her cooking skills so that she could prepare basic meals for herself. Over the last few months, she's been working with Anna, who's an occupational therapist from Vision Australia, and Anna's worked with Sally to find ways of making sure she can access the kitchen safely and confidently. They've also worked together to identify some of Sally's favourite meals and have practiced cooking them over a number of sessions. So Sally's now able to use the microwave and grill press to prepare basic meals for herself. Sally feels like she's progressed really well towards her goal of cooking independently. And in thinking about why this support worked well for her, Sally identified that she liked Anna's collaborative approach, and that she was much more motivated to cook because she could choose the meals that they would be making together. Sally's also talked to Anna about her plan review well ahead of time, which means that Anna's been able to prepare a comprehensive progress report detailing the outcomes that Sally has achieved. So that's really important because that'll help Sally to demonstrate that she's made good use of her funding to develop her skills and work towards her goals. So just an example of how you might think about one of your current goals and what's worked well for you. Identifying what's worked well can really help to identify what's important for you as you're thinking about additional supports that you might want in the future. So always refer back to your first plan and make sure you know what your goals were and have a think about how you're progressing towards them, whether they were effective, whether there's anything that stopped you from achieving them, those kinds of things. The NDIS will want to talk to you about all of your current goals at your plan review. So good idea to work through them beforehand and think about the ones that worked really well for you and any that maybe didn't work. So let's return to Sally again as our client example, in terms of thinking about a goal that might not have worked so well. So during her current plan, Sally also had a goal around building independence to organise her clothes and confidently choose appropriate outfits for work. So Sally's reflected on this goal and she doesn't think she's progressed towards it quite as well as she would have liked. She's worked with Anna, her OT, on developing strategies to organise her wardrobe, but she still doesn't really feel that confident about choosing outfits for herself. Sally thinks this is probably because her vision's deteriorated a bit over the last few months, and she now has more difficulty than she used to in identifying colours. So she decides to talk with her planner when her review comes around about approval for some assistive technology that might support her in achieving those goals. So she might look at things like a colour identifier and some of those pieces of technology that would help her. Anna's also able to include information in the progress report that she's writing about the challenges Sally had in meeting that goal and some future strategies that they've discussed together that might help her with those supports. So again, an example of how you might think about a goal that hasn't worked so well. Why hasn't it worked that well for you? Is there something additional that you could think about for your next plan that might assist you in achieving that? So that's your current supports. New supports are something that you might also want to think about as you're preparing for your plan review. So it's good to have a think about any new supports or new goals that you might want to work towards. So the kinds of things you might ask yourself would be whether there are things that are missing from your current plan that could help you sort of to improve your goals. It's also a good idea to think about what might have changed in your life since you last developed your plan. So it might be that your needs have changed a bit throughout the year. You might have had a change in your vision or a change in circumstances, something like that. You might also have gained new skills and independence as a result of some of the services and supports you've been accessing, or you might have taken up new hobbies and interests that mean you require some additional supports. So it's a good idea to think about any of those types of things that you might want to include in your plan so that you can discuss them with the NDIA. So let's return to our client example of Sally again. As we mentioned earlier, Sally feels that she's progressed well towards her goal of independent cooking, but she'd like to develop her skills in this area a bit further. So she'd particularly like to be able to make more complex dishes using the oven and stovetop and things like that. So using Vision Australia's planning tool, Sally's service provider puts together an estimate of the hours of service and the funding that Sally will need to help her to achieve that goal over the next year. Sally also feels that now that she's developed her confidence at home a bit more, she's quite keen to get more involved in community activities over the next year. So there's a local tandem cycling group that Sally's particularly interested in, and she'd also like to go to the gym a few times a week to help build her fitness. So Sally's service provider from Vision Australia talks with her about options for accessing a support worker. And again, using the Vision Australia planning tool, she's able to include information in Sally's service estimate about how that support might benefit her. So this is an example, I guess, of how Sally might build on some of her existing goals, so the goals she had around cooking. She wants to do more with that next year, but also how she might develop some entirely new ones based on the new confidence and skills that she's developed. And because she's worked with us using the planning tool, she's got lots of information in her service estimation that she can take to her planning meeting to make sure that she gets a good funding outcome. You might also want to think about how you're managing your funding when your plan review comes around. It's a good time to reassess that option. So think about how you've been managing your funding and whether that's worked well with you. As many of you might know, there's 3 ways to manage your plan. You can be self-managed, plan managed, or agency managed. So just a recap on that, we have discussed it in previous webinars, but we'll talk about it again a little bit. If you're choosing to self-manage, your providers will invoice you for the services and equipment that you receive, and you can then use the NDIS online participant portal to seek reimbursement from the NDIA. If you're third party or plan managed, they're the same thing, but they use a couple of different terms to refer to that. You basically nominate a plan manager to look after the financial transactions for you. So they'll organise payments to your service providers, and they might also help to do things like monitor your plan spending and give you information about how much funding you've got left and those kinds of things. If you're agency managed, the NDIA manages your funding for you and pays your service providers on your behalf. So the option that you choose for managing your funding might depend on things like how confident you are in accessing online content, particularly the NDIS participant portal, It might also depend on whether you feel comfortable about managing financial transactions yourself, or whether you'd prefer someone else to do that for you. Also good to note that you can choose a combination of those three options that we discussed. So different budgets or different components of your plan could be managed in different ways. So for example, you might decide to self-manage your core supports, so things that you might need for home support, such as cleaning and garden maintenance, you might manage that yourself, but have a plan manager or the NDIA manage therapy funding or your funding for assistive technology, just as an example. But your plan review is a good chance to think about how well your current funds management options been working for you, and whether you want to change anything in that regard. The NDIS website has information on each of the different plan management options and what's involved in those, so that you can choose which one's right for you. So it might be a good idea to have a look at that before your plan review, just to have a think about it and see if you're happy with the way it currently is, or whether there's anything you'd like to alter. And final tip in terms of plan preparation, try to be as honest as possible about your supports and your goals. The purpose of the NDIS is to support you to achieve your goals and live the life you choose. So try always to be honest about that when your plan review comes around. There are a few key things that you might want to take to your plan review. A copy of your current NDIS plan so that you can talk through that in terms of your current goals and things. Your service estimate document from Vision Australia, if you've been working with us, that's a really important one, because it will help your planner to understand what supports you need to reach your goals for the next year. And even if you're fairly confident in that, it can be really good to have your service estimate document there as a bit of a prompt, so you don't leave the planning meeting and realise there was something else really important that you wanted to talk about that sort of you lost track of during the discussion. So that service estimate can be really valuable. You'll also want to take any progress reports you've got from your service providers. As we talked about before, these provide your planner with information about the supports you've received during your plan and how those supports have assisted you to achieve your current goals. So they're quite important. And you can also take a support person to your planning meeting with you if you would like. That can be a family member, a friend, or a support coordinator or an advocate. Some people just find they feel a bit more comfortable if they have someone attend the plan review meeting with them and another pair of ears to hear what was said and things like that, because there's a fair bit involved. So a lot of people find that quite useful. So what if I'm not happy with my plan review? Hopefully that doesn't happen, particularly if you've done all the prep, but we know sometimes the best plans can go astray. If your plan review doesn't go well and you don't think you received the supports, all of the supports that you need, you can apply to the NDIA for an internal review of your planning decision. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can request a review by completing the form that's available on the NDIS website, or you can give the agency a call on their 1-800 number, or you can send them an email. So there's a few different options if you want to talk to somebody about instigating that internal review. Just be mindful that you do need to request an internal review within 3 months of receiving your planning decision. So don't sit on it for too long. Just make sure if you want to start that process that you do so within the 3 months. You can apply for an extension of time sometimes, but that gets a little bit more complicated and you've got to kind of demonstrate why you needed to do that. So just be mindful of that 3-month time frame. You will be asked to provide some information about why you think the initial planning decision was wrong. So have a think about that before you start the process. If you are instigating an internal review, it'll be considered by someone who wasn't involved in the original decision that was made about your plan. So it will always be considered by a different person. If you're still unhappy with the outcome of that internal review process, you can apply to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, which is an external review process that's separate from the agencies. you can't apply to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal until you've exhausted that internal review process with the agency. So your first step will always be to apply for an internal review of the decision. And then if you don't get the outcome you're looking for from that, you could look at taking it to the tribunal if you want to. If you do apply to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal for a review, you might want to seek some advice from an external advocacy or legal organisation, just because that process can be a bit daunting for some people, particularly if you haven't been through it before, and it may involve sort of attending hearings and things like that. So you might want some external advocacy support with it if you decide to go down that path. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly, because some of you might be new to Vision Australia or our webinars, we talked a bit earlier in this session about additional supports that you might want to include in your NDIS plan. We know that some of you might not have been in this process and some of you might not have attended one of our webinars before. So to get you thinking about some different options, we've got some info on the screen at the moment about the various services that Vision Australia can offer. And I'll try to describe these in terms that the NDIS might use, just so that you can think about how services like this might contribute to the goals in your plan and how it sort of fits in with the NDIS language. So the types of services that we have include emotional support and groups for social inclusion, occupational therapists to assist your independence, mobility specialists to help you stay safe and get around and participate in your community, orthoptists to assess your functional vision and make recommendations about equipment and things like that might be suitable for you. Education and employment support to achieve job goals and aspirations, aids and equipment from our shop that can help to improve daily living or make that a bit more straightforward, and technology and training to stay connected with your community. We also have early intervention, which can involve specialist children's and adolescent services, seeing eye dogs for independence. Through our library service, we offer audio books for leisure and learning, and we can provide helpful advice for clients and families as well as, of course, our NDIS experts to help you maximise your funding, which we've talked about today a bit already. There are also lots of assistive technology items that you can purchase from our Vision store. If you have access to consumables funding in your NDIS plan, you can use that to purchase low risk and low cost pieces of equipment. So examples of that might include things like talking clocks and watches and liquid level indicators. If you have approved funding for more complex assistive technology in your plan, you can often access that through Vision Store as well. So just to recap what we've talked about in the session, we've talked about what an NDIS plan review is and what's involved, how Vision Australia can help you to prepare for your plan review, some other general tips to help you prepare, key information that you might want to take with you, and what to do if you're not happy with the outcome of your plan review. So we've got a fair bit of time left. So Naomi, I might throw back to you again and we'll take some more questions. I can see that quite a few have come in there.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yes, we do have quite a few questions. Let's start with one from Steve, who would like to know how he can apply for funding for supports while on holidays.
So I'm not entirely clear on exactly what you're after there, Steve. If you were traveling overseas and you're going for an extended period of time, you'd probably need to let the agency know about that, as that could impact your funding. If you're thinking about supports you might access on holidays more locally, good idea to talk with your planner about that at your next plan review. There might be some scope for you to have support workers to assist you and things like that, which would generally come out of your core supports funding. So if that's something you're looking for, it would certainly be worthwhile to have a chat with your planner about it at your next review. Again, I guess just to remind everyone that the NDIS will only fund supports that are specifically related to your disability. So they're unlikely to pay for you to go on holiday, but if you need some support from a support worker in order to do that, that kind of thing might be funded. So just keep that in mind as you're sort of thinking about the types of support you might ask for and the kind of things you might need.
Thanks, Caitlin. We'll now go to Sky's question, which is, would it be helpful if I provide a medical letter from a paediatrician or GP explaining why we haven't used all our funding so that we don't lose it in our plan review? For example, O&M hours due to chronic illness.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful. And that's the kind of thing that we talked about earlier. Definitely worthwhile to sort of plan for that a bit ahead of time. If you know you haven't used all your funding, it's always really good if you can help to explain why that is, so that you don't lose access to that funding the next time around. Obviously, it's important for the agency to understand that you still need it. So yes, definitely a letter like that explaining why it hasn't all been used I would certainly take something like that to your review.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caitlin. We've now got a question from Ellie. Is there a way to change the plan anniversary date so that the plan review can take place at a better time of the year? Caitlin, are you there? I think you might be on mute. Sorry, everyone. Seems like we might have a slight technical problem. Looks like we've just got this slight technical problem which should be resolved very shortly. If you could please bear with us for a few moments, we will resume answering these questions.
Are you able to hear me now, Naomi?
Yes, we can hear you. We just can't see you.
Oh, right.
There we are. Perfect. Thanks, Caitlin.
No worries. Sorry about that, everyone. We had to do a quick laptop swap. So let's carry on. I think we had some more questions there.
Shall I just rephrase the previous question?
Yeah, I might have missed the first one, the last one you asked, I think, because that was about when we dropped out.
Great. All right. So I'll just repeat that. That question was from Ellie. Is there a way to change the plan anniversary date so that the plan review can take place at a better time of the year?
Yes, you could certainly talk with the agency about that, and I believe they're planning to introduce some increased flexibility to allow for that over the next few months. So that might be something to keep an eye on. They're doing some work to kind of align plan durations with, particularly for children and things like that, with key milestones. So yeah, that's certainly something you could talk about. Even before that comes in though, if your plan review's been scheduled and it's really not going to work for you, I think it would definitely be worthwhile to give your local area coordinator a call and see whether you can schedule it for a different time.
Great. Next question is from Carolyn, who would like to know, is it our responsibility to contact Vision Australia for assistance, or should Vision Australia contact us to make appointments? as we have a service agreement for the duration of this year's plan?
So normally your service provider would follow up with you if you've already got a service agreement with us, just to check in on how you're going. If you haven't heard from them for a while, it probably would be worthwhile for you to give us a call and just have a chat with someone, just in case anything's gone astray or the staff member you were working with has departed the organisation or something like that. So if you've not heard from us for a while, please do check in. Normally we would follow up with you, so that seems a little bit unusual, but occasionally something can go wrong and these things might happen. So I'm sorry to hear that that's the experience you've had, but definitely do get in touch with us.
Next question is from Giselle. Aside from Excel, are there any accessible self-management budget tracking tools for use on a PC?
I'm not personally aware of any, Giselle, but you could link up with an access technology specialist. We have a number of those here, so it might be worth having a chat with someone or giving our AT help desk a call to talk about different options. I guess it depends a little bit on what you want to do. Excel does have quite a lot of capability in terms of being able to do things like set up a spreadsheet with different formulas so that it can automatically calculate things for you and things like that. So if you might be able to find someone who's got a bit of expertise in that to set something up for you. If there's not another planning tool that would meet your needs, just another option to consider, I guess.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Another question is, how do I get quotes from Vision Australia for their services to take to an NDIS meeting?
So if you're working with us before your plan review, that's certainly something we can provide. That all comes as part of the planning tool that we use to help you prep for your review. So those quotes would be included in that. Otherwise, I would certainly give your service provider a call and have a chat with them about what you need. We can always provide those quotes to be taken with you to a meeting. So yeah, get in touch with us and have a chat. But ideally, obviously, we'd recommend that you come in for a discussion before your plan review, just to tick off all those various things and to try and make sure that you get the best funding outcome you can. And your quotes for services would definitely be included in that.
Excellent. I'll take a question now from Bobby, who is asking, I'm on a 2-year plan starting this year. My question is, can I get a review if I feel I need more funding or need more funding for something I'm not yet funded for?
Yes, you can. So you can always apply for an unscheduled plan review, and you might do that for the exact circumstance you've identified, really, where your needs have changed and you might need funding for something that you haven't had before. So yes, you certainly can do that. To do that, you would contact your local area coordinator or give the agency a call and have a talk with them about it. That's called an unscheduled plan review, and it will mean that you get an entirely new plan as a result of that process. So you'll have sort of a different plan end date and things like that probably. But yeah, if your current funding isn't meeting your needs, that's certainly something you can ask for.
Great. Bobby also wanted to know if all plans are going to be 2 years from now on.
No, not necessarily. That very much depends on the individual circumstance. So if you don't feel like a 2-year plan is going to work for you, it's really important you talk to the planner about that at your review, because they might be able to work out a more customized duration or do a 1-year plan, particularly if you're thinking about things like something that's going to change significantly for you over the next couple of years that might impact your funding and the types of services that you need. So definitely important to talk to them about that and explore other options for the duration of your plan if that's something that you need. So no, they won't necessarily all be 2 years by default. For some people, if their needs aren't going to change a huge amount over that time, then a 2-year plan might work. But obviously we know it doesn't work for everyone. So yeah.
Thanks, Caitlin. We've now got a question from Elise. I'm wanting to access assistance with Vision Australia for my son's plan review. I'm currently self-managed. How do we do this?
You can always access assistance from us irrespective of how you're managing your funding. So I would give your local office a call, or give us a call on our 1300 number, and talk to somebody about getting in touch with your local team to help you prepare for that plan review. That's definitely something we can do. We always offer that service regardless of whether you're self-managing or not. So probably the best thing to do is just give us a call. I'm not sure where you're located, Elise, but we'd be able to put you in touch with your local team and get you working with a staff member who can support with that.
Thanks. Now a question from Maria about technology. How could I go about getting the ORCAM through the NDIS?
Okay, so the ORCAM is a complex piece of assistive technology, and because of the complexity of the tech and the cost involved, you would need to have an assessment for that before it would be approved as part of your funding. So generally, in order to do that assessment, you'd work with an access technology specialist. That assessor's job is to help you identify the most appropriate piece of equipment for your particular needs. So you'll probably find that they'll trial a number of options with you, and the NDIS expects them to do that as part of the assessment process, even if you're sort of fairly clear in thinking that it's the ORCAM you want. They would still look at other options to make sure that everything's been considered. So that assessor would then do a report which you can submit to the agency to seek approval for that funding. So generally that's how that would work. Those approvals can take a little bit of time, and you would need to have some funding to cover the assessment in your current NDIS plan. So, but in general, that's how that would work. It's a fairly complex piece of assistive tech, so you would need to have an assessment for it. The NDIS, when they're looking at that type of technology, will be particularly interested in how it helps you to achieve your goals. They'll also want to look at whether it's value for money, which is why, or whether it represents value for money, which is why your assessor might work with you to sort of look at some other options as well, and just make sure that the ORCAM is going to be the best piece of equipment for your particular needs.
Great, thank you. Lindy has a question. What happens when you turn 65?
So if you're already registered as an NDIS participant before you turn 65, you can continue to access funding through that scheme. That wouldn't change. You do need to be under 65 at the time you sign up though. So if you're already 65 and you haven't registered for NDIS yet, you would need to access support most likely through the My Aged Care scheme or another funding source. As long as you're under 65 when you sign up for NDIS though, you can continue to use it after you turn 65.
Excellent, thank you, Caitlin. We have a question from Young. How can you speed up the review process?
That's a tricky one. I can't really think of anything you could do to speed up your scheduled plan review process. If you're applying for an unscheduled plan review though, depending on what it's for, like for example, if you're doing an unscheduled review because you had some really urgent home modifications needs or something like that, you could let the agency know when you submit your home mods assessment that it is really urgent, so that they know to try and prioritise that review where they can. That would be more for like an unscheduled plan review though. In terms of your normal sort of scheduled plan review, I don't know there's a lot you can do to speed that up. Probably just use the additional time you've got wisely in terms of preparation.
Great. A question from Kerry Ann. What supports are available for someone who has not yet lost functional vision but has a diagnosis that they will soon do so over the next few years. Are preparation supports able to be funded?
Yeah, I would. If you're already an NDIS participant, then yes, I would think that they could be. The NDIS always wants to look at not so much your diagnosis, but more what the functional impact of your vision impairment is on your day-to-day life. So yes, if there's there are functional impacts of that or some preparation that you need to do, I certainly think it'd be worthwhile to talk with your planner about that.
Great. The next question is, will the NDIS cover the cost of transcription or formatting services over and above the free quota offered to Vision Australia clients?
Yes, that is something that can be funded as part of your NDIS plan. We do know, though, that sometimes people do have some challenges in getting that funded in their plan. So just be mindful of that and try to think of ways that you can really link it up to show how it fits in with your NDIS plan goals, so that you can maximise your chances of getting funding for that. It is something that NDIS will fund, but we do know that some people have found it.
Oh, apologies. It seems like
To maximise the opportunity there.
Sorry, Caitlin. I think your audio dropped out there just at the end. If you might want to repeat the last bit.
Okay, am I back?
You are back.
Yep. So yeah, just think about how it links in with your plan goals to maximise the opportunity of getting funding for that. We know sometimes it's a little bit tricky for people to get that support in their plans, but it should be available. And obviously it's something we'll continue to advocate for.
Great, thank you. A question from Ramona. Is it possible to request and receive your NDIS plan in 2 different alternative formats? For example, if I want my plan in hard copy braille and emailed as a Word file, is that possible? And Ramona's saying that she cannot find how to achieve that through the portal.
So the NDIS has recently announced a couple of changes in terms of making sure they communicate with people in accessible formats. So I know that you can now nominate a couple of different communication preferences. So if, for example, you generally get all your NDIS communications electronically through your MyGov account, you can now nominate a separate preference for your plan. So, for example, you could get a copy of your plan in Braille if you wanted, that's sort of separate from your usual communication preferences that you have with the agency. As to whether you can access it in 2 different formats, I'm not quite sure about that. I would suggest that if you can't find it on the portal, give the agency a call and ask them directly whether they can help with that.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Ian. How do I use my funding to go out into the community when I have a partner and don't want to go with a support worker who I don't know?
That's a tricky one, Ian. I guess we'd possibly have to know a little bit more, or maybe have a bit more of a think about the kinds of activities that you want to do. For example, are there any circumstances where you might want to do something that your partner's not particularly interested in, that you could do with a support worker? Some of those kinds of things. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Okay. Thanks, Caitlin.
We might take probably 2 more, Naomi.
Sure. The next one is from Lena. If a child has multiple disabilities or conditions, how do we ensure that they get support in their NDIS plan to cover all of them?
Yeah, so the NDIS will generally ask you to nominate a primary disability. That said, they're not always quite so I mean, obviously the diagnosis is important, but generally they're particularly interested in the functional impacts that those disabilities have on your child's day-to-day life. So even if you have to nominate a primary disability, I'd be really focusing in your access request and your planning discussions on how all of those different disabilities or impairments link up in terms of the functional impact that they have on your child's day-to-day life. So that would sort of maximize your capacity to get support for all of them, I guess. You know, a lot of NDIS participants do have complex needs. So yeah, even though they might ask you to nominate one primary disability, it's still really important to show functionally how all those different issues that your child experiences kind of link up.
Great. All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Now for the last question from Michelle. My plan has been renewed with a lower level of transport funding. What can I do?
So that comes back to some of the things we talked about earlier. If you're unhappy with the outcome of your plan, you could always look at applying for an internal review. Bearing in mind that might take a little bit of time, so have a think about how far away you are perhaps from your next scheduled plan review. But that's probably your best option if the funding that you've got at the moment doesn't really meet your current needs. You'd be looking at that internal review process with the agency. And again, thinking about information you might need to provide about why you didn't think that initial plan decision was fair, or why it's not, you know, accurate to your particular circumstances. I think that's all we have time for, everyone. Thank you very much for dialing into today's session, and apologies for the couple of technical glitches that we've had. I hope you've still found it useful. Just a reminder that that survey will pop up on your screen at the end of the webinar, so if you could take a couple of minutes to complete that, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for dialing in, and thanks to Naomi and Siobhan, who've been our tech crew behind the scenes, making sure that everything runs smoothly. As smoothly as possible today. There will be a recording of the webinar available after the session, so you'll be sent a link to that if you would like to watch it again. And don't forget, if you've got any questions or you'd like any support around your NDIS plan, please always feel free to give Vision Australia a call or send us an email. We're always happy to hear from you, so please get in touch. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you all again soon.